brought the issue of the regime for Internet governance, global Internet governance, to us from a series that was being conducted at the USC Annenberg School under the auspices of Jonathan Aronson, who, along with his co-authors of the book Transforming Global Information Communications Markets, Peter Cowie and Don Abelson, we're pursuing a dialogue on how trade laws could impact the global economy in a way that would foster the free flow of communications and an open market worldwide for digital goods, services, and ideas. We then, with their permission and cooperation, took on this project. We received funding from 4 foundations, led by the Markle Foundation. Stefan Verhulst is here representing Markle, and they particularly took a leadership role. The MacArthur, Knight, and Ford Foundations also supported it. And we convened over the next 2 years a series of 4 plenary meetings and a number of working groups involving 26 companies from the United States and Europe, government officials from 6 countries representing 18 agencies, 14 representatives of civil society, all under the managing directorship of Gary Epstein, who is right over here, who has moved on to higher callings of he will be co-managing the spectrum at the Federal Communications Commission, and the management of Sarah Eppiheimer, who's here in the back. Also, our staff consisted of, in addition to the chairmanship of Reed Hunt, Peter Cowie, Jonathan Aronson, Don Abelson, Shanthi Kalathal, Kate Ashton, Melanie Hart, and support of David Hansen and Skadden Arps. What we're going to do very quickly is have Reed introduce the report and then get remarks from 2 government representatives who you will recognize. And very quickly, because they're going to have to, at least one of them has to leave very soon. So without further ado, I want to introduce the former chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, the CEO of the Coalition for Clean Energy, a close friend of the Aspen Institute and the Communications and Society program, and the chair of the Aspen Idea Project, Reed Hunt.
Thanks, Charlie. You could think of the Aspen Idea Report as a letter with a copy to my friend Danny Weitzner and a copy to Chairman Genachowski. But the addressee would be the head of the International Telecommunications Union, Hamadoun Touré, and you could think of this as a letter that says, would you please reconsider your intent to put the light touch of government on the operations of the Internet? Touré will be running a major meeting of world governments in Dubai at the end of this year. It's known as WICET 12. We could call it a light touch if that's what you would call a grab for the jugular vein of the Internet. The issues may include a per-click tax on international Internet traffic, individual nation-state regulation of identities for online activity, national encryption standards to allow government surveillance, and multinational governance of the Internet. Russia, China, India, and Brazil have already suggested that the Internet must fall within the sovereign right of states to govern communications. And, of course, the International Telecommunications Union, the longest-standing multinational governance institution in the world, was founded in order to regulate international telegraphy and then international telephony. So the fundamental idea that the ITU would take on this topic tells you a great deal about the cultural approach to the governance of the Internet, namely that multinational, as opposed to multi-stakeholder organizations, ought to be a preferred method. To offer a competing view, the one that actually has prevailed since the Internet started to become a commercial phenomenon in the early 1990s, the Aspen Institute convened the IDEA Forum with the support of Markle, Knight, Ford, and MacArthur. Starting more than 2 years ago, Aspen assembled 36 American and European corporations, high-level government officials from 6 countries representing 18 different agencies, and 14 representatives of civil society from the United States, Europe, India, and Brazil. After many plenary meetings, working groups, and drafting sessions, the Aspen Institute today proposes that instead of nation-state governance for the Internet, the global medium should be managed by multi-stakeholder entities, groups where for-profit and not-for-profit firms with government attending but not governing would try to solve in open debate the key technical problems that are obstacles to the global reach of the Internet. This is not a new idea. This is the way the Internet has been governed. But the upcoming Dubai meeting tells us that those who advocate the continuation of this approach must now explain how that form of government can solve the many emerging new problems in the workings of the common medium. Today I'm going to offer quickly my own personal views, not those of Aspen Institute or even all the members of our team, about how our report and its ideas would apply to current problems, and I'm specifically going to talk about just one of the many examples. China in April of 2012. As in the United States, 2012 is an election year in China. Unlike the United States, if China transfers power from Hu to presumably Xi, that would be only the second peaceful governmental succession in China in more than a century. The succession process in China consists of the elevation of 2 members of the 9-person Standing Committee of the Communist Party of China to positions 1 and 2. Less than 400 people will vote on China's new leadership. That means approximately 1 out of every 3 million people in China compose the electorate. The small, closed, secret process does not guarantee a smooth process, and it is subject to rumors because of its secrecy. These are not inconsequential rumors equivalent merely to modern soap opera. They are rumors that speak about the core questions for all concerned about the future of the world's political system. The specific rumor of April is that a faction supporting Bo instead of Xi staged some sort of coup early this April. Hu is said to have stepped in to block Bo. This subterranean political upheaval either preceded or has led to the fall of the power couple of Bo and his wife Gu, who are now implicated in the death of British national Neil Heywood last year. Despite the fact that there are more Internet users in China than in any other country in the world, none of us in the global Internet community really know what's going on in China. That alone tells us how far away from living up to the ideals of freedom in the medium of the Internet is China. We also know that if we were chatting about these rumors on the Internet in China, if we were in China right now and this were on the Internet, we could be arrested. According to one newspaper, since February, Beijing police have arrested more than 1,000 people for Internet conduct considered to be, quote, harmful, unquote, because it was the perpetuation of rumors about the story I've just told you. Indeed, we might well be turned into the government by our micro-blogging firm, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, if we were to put any of these rumors in a Twitter feed. That is the expressed wish, actually, of the Internet Society of China, which is a leading multi-stakeholder entity governing the Internet in China. It has urged companies like Sina and Tencent, the equivalent of our microbloggers, to take, quote, effective measures, unquote, to prevent online rumors by, quote, seriously obeying the country's laws and regulations as well as self-disciplinary rules. So if we advocate multi-stakeholder governance, we have to face the fact that we cannot, at the same time, approve of a multi-stakeholder entity that conducts itself in the fashion of the Internet of Society of China, much less the Chinese government, unless, in fact, our advocacy is completely bereft of any attention to the principles that you would want a multi-stakeholder governing entity, in fact, to adopt and advocate. Now, when the Aspen Institute, or anyone, the United States, supports non-government governance of the Internet, we do so because we believe the world will, on balance, be better off in economic terms if the Internet wraps the world in a common platform for economic growth. The Aspen Principles set out foundational guidelines to better achieve the potential for global economic growth that will benefit all people. But not just utilitarianism supports the vision of a common information platform. Even if we weren't likely to see greater economic growth with a global internet, it would still be the case that we would want everyone in the world to share this common medium because we believe in the basic goodnesses of free expression, freedom of association, freedom to learn, and freedom to create. To borrow from the philosopher Derek Parfit, this is a quote, everyone ought to follow the principles whose universal acceptance would make things go best. He calls this, quote, Kantian rule consequentialism. If you would like details, he has provided 1,400 pages within the last couple of months
somewhere here, I hope.
in a book called What Matters. I call this a useful way to talk about Internet governance. The Internet should be run in accordance with principles that, if universally applied, would make things go best. And multi-stakeholder groups, no less than governments, have to adhere to those principles. To this end, the Idea Forum enabled Aspen to write down the principles. They are in this book, and they are online for everyone in the world, we would hope, even in China, to review and comment upon in their own names or under pseudonyms. They are broken into a common statement, which is a kind of prologue, and into more detailed blocks of principles set out according to topics. I believe, this is the most comprehensive and detailed set of principles yet set forth for Internet governance. Furthermore, we suggest in this report that all empowered multi-stakeholder governing entities must accept and apply a common set of principles. If they don't like these, they need to agree on some other set. They need this connecting tissue. We also suggest that at least one multi-stakeholder entity be assembled to act as a monitoring group for adherence to the principles by all other similar entities. Monitoring can at least call the question of whether the Internet Society of China is acting in accord with these principles. The response to it is open to discretionary action by government and by other organizations, but somebody has to name names. Under these principles, I believe that all would conclude that the Internet Society of China is out of bounds. It is not adhering to Parfit's maxim. It is not acting consistent with the Aspen principles. To stifle comment about an attempted coup is not a universal rule that would make things go best for all people in the world or even in China. We ought not be relativists about all forms of government and all forms of conduct within nation-state boundaries as to the Internet. China is not the only country where the government is not ready or all multi-stakeholder organizations are not ready to follow the principles that, if universally accepted, would make the Internet go best. Anyone can question, too, whether the United States adheres to those principles. But there's little doubt that on the Internet as we know it, in most other countries, and certainly in this country, those questions can be asked and can be vigorously debated on this medium. It is that vigorous debate about the future of the Internet to which we are trying to contribute today. So we owe special thanks to Peter Cowie, the Dean of the University of California, San Diego, to Jonathan Aronson at the University of Southern California, to Don Abelson, right over here, formerly of the U.S. Trade Office and also the FCC, to Gary Epstein, now back again at the FCC, and also a communications lawyer of long standing. And finally, our special thanks go to the generous foundation supporters and all the members of the forum who gave us the opportunity to write this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reed. And we've been privileged to have the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission attend a number of our plenary sessions and give a major speech at the Brussels plenary a year ago. And his speech, along with several others of European leaders and Reed Hunt's, are also reprinted in the back of this report, which is available at www.aspeninstitute.org/idea. He only has a few minutes, but he really wanted to come and react to the report. I'm pleased to welcome Julius Genachowski, Chairman of the Federal Communications Commission.
Thank you. It is true that when this was scheduled, my staff told me it was logistically impossible for me to be here. And I said, no, I've watched Star Trek. We're gonna find a way to be here. And I wanted to be here because this project, the Aspen Idea Project, has been both very important and a success. And I want to first thank the people who have made that happen. Reed Hunt and Peter Cowie and Don Abelson and Jonathan Aronson and Gary Epstein. A tremendous amount of hard work, deep thinking, and creativity has gone into this, as well as a commitment to the fundamental ideals of freedom of expression, association, and economic growth. I want to thank the funders who've supported this and all of the participants, many of whom are here. Many more have participated in the plenaries and in the working groups. It's been a wonderful thing about how the Internet has advanced and progressed since its beginnings. Multi-stakeholder processes like these, people coming together from different parts of the ecosystem, sitting through working sessions, discussing, debating, that has helped contribute to the extraordinary success of the Internet. And I want to thank Danny Weitzner, too. Danny, of course, has been working on these issues of Internet freedom for a very, very long time. We're lucky that Danny continues to do this work now in the White House, bringing his experience and energy and wisdom to these processes. When this started 2 years ago, and I believe I was, in addition to Brussels, I believe I was at the very opening session. It's worth pausing for a minute to think about where we were then versus where we are now when it comes to these issues. I remember at the time it took some convincing to get people to say, what happens with Internet governance issues globally is important enough for you to spend your time in the energy. It wasn't conventional wisdom a couple of years ago. And in fact, to a certain extent, both the opportunities and the threats were largely theoretical at that point. The tablet was introduced, the iPad was introduced either right before or right after the kickoff of Aspen Ideas project. Smartphone penetration around the world has tripled since the first meeting. At the time, I think it was thought pie in the sky that within just a few years, 5 billion people around the world will have access to smartphones, meaning they'll have access to the Internet from wherever they are. I think that was thought to be pie in the sky, and now we can see it coming. Cloud computing was much more theoretical as a global business opportunity than it is now. The threats, too, were theoretical as compared to what we see now. Reed was eloquent about very real concerns in China. We see more and more countries around the world adopting or looking seriously at regulations, laws, rules that would restrict the free flow of information in their countries. And, of course, we see a dangerous movement to fundamentally change the form of Internet governance that has worked so well, to move from a multi-stakeholder model to a multinational model, and to create a brand new layer of formal governance for the Internet that would be a bad idea and that threatens to reverse the flow of success of the Internet. We know now that these threats are real because we have concrete proposals from countries saying this is what we want to do. And because, as we heard from Reed, there is a important international conference scheduled in just a number of months where some of these issues will be discussed, debated. I won't say that Reed and Don and Jonathan and Gary and Peter anticipated all of this when they started, except that it wouldn't be the first time that this group had predicted the future. And in fact, I think if you look back at what this group said when this started, much of what they said could happen on the danger side is in fact much more of a threat now. And on the opportunity side, it's much more provable than it was. And so the work that was started 2 years ago and that's made so much progress over the last 2 years is tremendously important. It's already contributed substantially to the international debate, discussion in these areas. There was an important OECD communique now about a year ago. Danny was a principal driver of that. It was informed in very significant parts by the work that the Aspen Ideas Project had done to that point. There are bilateral discussions that have been happening, that are happening, that will happen, that have been, are being, and will be informed by the work that this group, this project, has done. The upcoming international conferences, the WICET, will be informed by the work that this group has done. The consensus that the areas of consensus that the group has achieved are important, as are the areas where the group identified clear principles, clear goals, and there's still work to be done to determine the best path forward. That's important too. So I wanted to be here because I wanted to thank everyone involved, reiterate the importance of it. We are at a crossroads when it comes to the future of the Internet. We're at a very real crossroads where one path is a path of freedom, a path of freedom of expression, free flow of data, a path of economic growth, supported by a multi-stakeholder model for Internet governance that unleashes innovation, entrepreneurship, all of the incredible things that we have seen. It's one path. The other path is a path characterized by a balkanized Internet that will harm us all. Thanks to the work of the Aspen Ideas Project, all the people involved in it, there is a clear path toward freedom and prosperity. It's the path that we have to choose. It's the path that we have to fight for together in the weeks and months and years ahead. And so for helping to put the U.S. and all freedom-loving people around the world in the position to engage in this process successfully. Thank you, Reed, and thank you to all of you who've been involved in this.
Thank you, and we'll beam him up. We'll beam him back to his office. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you. He's already been introduced, so with not much further ado, we had participation from a number of government agencies in the U.S. as well as in Europe. What we decided was that to represent basically the government agencies, we would bring over the person in the White House who's in charge of Internet policy there. He's Deputy Chief Technology Officer of the United States, Daniel Weitzner.
Charlie, thanks. And let me first thank Reed for the letter. It's my copy has been signed already. I hope yours is by at least one of the authors, but I got to get the rest of them. And again, I really congratulate and thank the entire team, Gary and Don, Jonathan and Peter, who aren't here. I want to really especially acknowledge the leadership that Chairman Genachowski has provided all of us in this administration, of course, with full respect for the independence of his office. He really has helped us, as you heard, in making sure that we stay focused on what really matters when it comes to communications policy and the evolution of the Internet and all the very challenging and sometimes maddeningly arcane tasks that are before that commission. But Julius and his entire team there really have, I think, made a tremendous contribution over the last few years, and we look forward to more. I wanted to say one thing about this process. I agree with Chairman Genachowski's view about how much it's contributed substantively to the work that's followed, and I'll talk about that. One of the great things about being in government is I get to learn from lots of people who have been through these kinds of processes in so many different contexts. I'm getting to know a number of people in the Defense Department, and they have these big problems. They have to plan for big challenges, and they are fond of saying it's not so much the plan but the planning that really gets you through when you actually have to face a challenge, because of course the challenge you face is never exactly the one that you planned for, but the fact that you brought people together to think through what might happen, to think through what is important, what your values are, what your options are, what your tools are, who your friends are, who your allies are, is critical to success. And I think in many ways, for me, more than anything else, this has been a process that has helped to expand the discussion both in the United States and in certain places around the world of this question of how we keep the Internet growing, free, and innovative and inclusive. And I think that in my experience over the years in working in the Internet environment, there's always been a very delicate balance of, on the one hand, leadership by, frankly, a relatively small number of individuals, participation by an enormous and hopefully growing number of individuals, all tied together by a common ethos about how this whole thing is supposed to go. Everything from what the goals are to what it means to be a civil participant in a discussion in facing a challenge, to how to make sure to be inclusive and consider all views. That's the ethos of the Internet environment, and I think that the Aspen project, the IDEA project, has really made a tremendous contribution in bringing those values to this discussion and helping to bring more people into the discussion. Because more than any of the institutions, I think that, as we all know, whether they're formal treaty-based institutions or just collections of open-source developers in Namibia, we're going to succeed or fail here based on a commitment to common values. I actually think that's true even of very formal government activities, but it's especially true of this kind of less structured, multi-stakeholder environment. So my personal thanks really go to Aspen for helping to expand the recognition of the critical ethos of the Internet and to expand those who are part of that discussion. I think that really when you get very concrete here, the work that's been done in Aspen is going to help us to meet the challenges of keeping the Internet open, free, and innovative. I want to just tick off some of what we see as the challenges and give you a sense of where I think the contributions have come. On the domestic policy side, I think we've been very engaged, as you know, in questions of consumer privacy. We've made lots of good progress there. We're having very serious discussions on issues like cybersecurity. We've had very intense discussions on issues such as online copyright protection. I think in all of those cases, we've identified paths forward that are in many ways are reflective of the multi-stakeholder policymaking process that the Aspen report describes. Internationally, as many of you know, we have an active dialogue both with the European Union and with many other countries on how to approach consumer privacy issues. We have questions you've heard about the role of the International Telecommunications Union, and also I think critical questions about how to bring these principles that tie the open internet together into our trade disciplines. I'll talk about that at the end. For us, the baseline of a lot of this work was articulated several years ago in the President's International Strategy for Cyberspace. It's based on many of the same principles you hear articulated here and developed in much the same time frame, not accidentally, principles of innovation, of freedom of expression, of privacy, and multi-stakeholder governance. We were able, in no small part, thanks to the dialogue that this process, that the Aspen process established, to bring many of those principles into the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's dialogue on internet policymaking principles. And as Chairman Genachowski recently noted, those principles have now been adopted by the 34 member states of the OECD and Egypt. This, along with the Aspen report, for us is a critical foundation that we can build on, both in discussions of global internet governance and in discussions of how we approach trade disciplines to keep the internet marketplace open. And I think I'd really highlight at this point one of the critical contributions that Aspen has made, one of the critical principles I think that multi-stakeholder governance leads us to, which is that from the very beginning in the internet environment, we've recognized the vital relationship between the commercial prerequisites of the internet environment, the technical prerequisites of the internet environment, and basic human rights principles. Free flow of information, freedom of expression, privacy have always been very tightly connected in successful internet models, and where those balances have gotten out of whack, or where there's worry that we're not quite paying attention to all those principles adequately, is where we tend to have problems. So I think that what we've really learned is that multi-stakeholderism means not just everyone at the table, not just lots of tables, but it also means that those tables have to take a somewhat more inclusive view than perhaps we're used to, that links commercial law, traditional regulatory approaches, consumer protection law, trade law, and human rights law. It's not a small challenge, but I think that the frameworks that we have really are going to help us with that. I think what we also learned is that when we get lots of governments at the table, when we get lots of legal systems at the table, we have an additional set of challenges about how to keep a single, coherent internet environment. We see this, I think, most prominently in the discussions of privacy and data protection around the world. As many of you know, we recently released the administration's Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights, in which we outlined a set of privacy principles that we expect all citizens ought to be entitled to. We outlined a framework in which we can begin to implement those principles through enforceable codes of conduct developed through a multi-stakeholder process, and the way in which we would like to see those principles articulated in legislation. Because we took this multi-stakeholder approach, because we took this approach that really emphasizes flexible implementation of broad principles, I think we're also making progress in bridging some of the gaps that we have with the European Union. Obviously, their framework for protecting data protection is structurally different from ours. Sometimes that structural difference has been interpreted as a kind of a principled chasm that we're never going to be able to get across, that one side or the other is going to have to cave in some sense. I think that what we've learned over the last year is that actually the opposite is true. We've had an ongoing dialogue, both in private and also very much in public, with our colleagues in the European Commission. Recently, we had a large delegation from the Commission and the Parliament visit Washington, and Vice President Reding and Secretary Bryson issued a statement coming out of that dialogue in which they recognize that while the regulatory regimes between the U.S. and Europe are different, the difference is just in the way our legal systems function, separate and apart from anything about data protection, that because we we have privacy regimes based on a common set of principles, and because we have a mechanism by which we can make sure that we can develop codes of conduct that are enforceable through our legal systems, that will have the basis for resolving some of the differences that we have in cross-border data flow. So we're very encouraged by this. We're going to take a lot of these principles into the trade arena. Many of you are involved in the discussion of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a major priority for this administration. We've been working very hard on two chapters relevant to this discussion, both the intellectual property protection chapter and the chapter on electronic commerce, which aims to lower barriers to offering internet-based services, cloud computing services in particular. And TPP, I think, offers a great example of how we have been able to take principles that have been developed in discussions like this over the last few years that were adopted in the OECD and are now being discussed as concrete binding trade disciplines. So the OECD Internet Policy Principles, as an example, said that we should avoid requirements that data be housed in any particular place, that we ought not restrict the flow of information across borders based on where that data is located, but rather, at the same time, the OECD principles recognize that countries have national imperatives, have national requirements to protect consumer protection values, human rights values, and I think with the structure laid out in the OECD principles that is also reflected in this Aspen report, we have the basis for bridging that gap, for developing trade disciplines that can assure that we can have an open and vibrant internet marketplace globally and also protect important national priorities such as privacy, security, and others. So I think there's a huge amount to do going forward. We've had a couple of years, the last year or so, I think it's fair to say they were the years of the internet principles. We had principles from here, we had principles from the OECD. There are principles all over the place. We had a wonderful set of principles coming out of Brazil, actually was one of the first in this crop of principles, 2008, 2009, I think it was 2008. And, I think the good news for this process is the principles are all, I think, remarkably well aligned. I don't think they're accidentally well aligned because I think they reflect careful attention to how the internet actually works. I think our challenge going forward is to actually start implementing these principles in ways that affirm our collective commitments to the idea of an open internet and also make sure that citizens, companies and countries have recourse when those principles are not respected. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and again, thanks very much to everyone at Aspen who's done this extraordinary work.
Thank you, Dan. Let me take a minute, first of all, to remind people that it is available for download on the internet at www.aspeninstitute.org/idea. It's also, the Twitter hashtag is IdeaReport, and we're looking forward to a debate on Twitter as well as we encourage you to write comments on the website that I just cited. We have printed out for the people here copies of the comments that have been submitted so far and encourage an ongoing debate on this. Let me also mention that this report, which I'm showing we have a live web stream for those here who didn't realize that. The report includes the Aspen, essentially, staff report. It reflects our view of what went on over the last 2 years. It includes an appendix of a framework paper from Dean Peter Cowie, another framework paper from Shanthi Kalathal, and a chart of different sets of principles and how they differ that was prepared by Shanthi Kalathal also, and speeches from 4 leaders at our plenary sessions, Julius Genachowski, Reed Hunt, also Nellie Cruz, and Vivian Redding, who addressed our conference in Brussels when we had it there. Let me also mention that we haven't really gone into the details of what the report says, but essentially there's a common statement of essentially what we think the internet culture should look like, and then a set of principles that go to the free flow of communication across borders, and to the essentially to creating a trusted environment that would encourage people to use that. The second major thrust of the report goes to the multi-stakeholder process and what it might look like. We did it as it's termed as a thought experiment. We understand that it is open to great debate, and as Dan said, this is a strong interest now in how do you design something. And as we move forward, we thought you need to obviously recognize national sovereignty. At the same time, you want to have principles that people in governments, businesses, and users recognize as a kind of global common standard for how you think of the internet, and then how do you enforce this. So let me call on the person who was our managing director and general counsel for the process, Gary Epstein.
I'm very excited now to say for the first time since 11:30 a.m. this morning that I am speaking as the former managing director of the Aspen Idea Project and not as an official of the FCC anymore. This is not an FCC statement. This is an Aspen statement. As the managing director and general counsel, to put it maybe kindly, I was maybe the repository of many comments and views of many of the different factions that were or people that were involved. And I'd just like to very briefly talk about what I see as homework for Aspen 2 or anybody else or OECD 2 or EU 2 or the two things where really we didn't have as much agreement as I would have liked to have seen. One is pretty specific, and I'm not sure what to do about it, and the other is much more general, and I think, quite frankly, more important. The specific one is, you've all heard about and maybe participated in the SOPA and PIPA issues that were involved publicly over the last year. We had a microcosm of that in the Aspen Idea group over the last 2 years. And there are really important, vital, valid interests on both sides of copyright and free flow of information. We had wonderful debates about it, and we just weren't able to make as much progress. I think there were people of good feeling, people who wanted to reach agreement, but we had a hard time getting beyond the talking points. And we leave that to a future group to resolve. Maybe our goals were too broad in trying to resolve those issues along with everything else. And the second broader and more important issue, and I want to put a sharper point on it, is this issue of multi-stakeholder governance. What we really weren't able to resolve, and I think this is the challenge, is are our existing institutions or extensions of them sufficient to beat back the fractionalization and other problems and issues that we were talking about? Do we continue to work on these? Do we continue to make them broader? There's a good discussion in the Aspen Idea paper about some of the existing multi-stakeholder institutions, all the good work that they're doing and all of the good work that they could be doing. Are they sufficient? Okay. Do we need to invent something new? What are the dangers of inventing something new? Does that play in the hands of people who are looking for centralized governance or not? And I think more scholarship and research about precedent and about things which have occurred in the past would really be helpful here. I think there are some good resources out there, and I think that's something which Aspen 2 or other institutions should focus on in the future. Thanks, Charlie.
Let me also mention that in the back of the book is the list of people who participated, but we also have throughout the report disclaimers saying that we did not take votes. We do not suggests that any particular statement is supported by any particular person or their employer. So just want to be clear on that. So it's not just FCC employees who might be saying that. So what we had to do was listen to people, go through this process, these at times torturous working groups, come up with the principles. The principles were resulted from the working group, but there was not a vote at the end. And in the end, it was basically the Aspen staff that put together this report from what had been said and what had been engaged. By the way, we can fit a couple more people at both of these ends of the table if you want to come in, and let's start a dialogue about this. We haven't gone into detail what the principles are. They begin at page 14 of the report. And there's also a common statement the page before, page 13. And then we have the discussion on not only the principles, but then on to the means of implementation. So maybe if anybody wants to start off with any comments. Yes. And before, as you do, for our streaming audience, if you'll identify yourself and then give your comment.
Sure. My name's Daniel Berninger. I'm an entrepreneur that works on communication startups. The question for the team, one of the background developments that is sort of increasing is the move of the telephone network to become an all-IP network. The authority of the ITU is the telephone network and the voice telephone network, and they're asserting that they have a role in the Internet. Can the principles be used to, over time now, to kind of unify the treatment regulation of the soon-to-be all-IP telephone network with the Internet? Because we've carried forward back from your day at the FCC thinking of these things on two sides of our head. It's getting to the point now where we're going to be living in the same house, and it's going to be difficult to pretend we're not breathing the same air.
I think that I'm not going to speak to what the report has to say about that. I'll let Reed and Gary and Don do that. I think that in a very simple sense, just because you have a piece of technology that enables people to hear each other's voices, I don't think that means it merits or requires international regulation by the International Telecommunications Union. We've been doing this for a long time, as you know, on the Internet. It seems to work okay. And if there are problems, I think we should address them. I think what we've seen is that, in fact, IP-based, Internet-connected communications of all sorts, voice, video, images, everything else, seems to be generally a lot cheaper, a lot more flexible, seems to reach people much more quickly, and I think we should be encouraging that. So I don't think that there's any need to unify anything, really. I think the unification exists at the technical level because of Internet standards. There are occasionally interoperability issues. They seem to get worked out through the appropriate Internet standards bodies. And I don't think I see a problem in search of a solution.
So you're advocating for maintaining the fiction. We have this thing called the telephone network. We have this thing called the Internet. We handle them separately.
Which is the fiction?
The fiction is that they're different. They're separate. And where we're kind of headed is that they're really going to be indistinguishable. The way the telephone network is implemented will be Internet protocol. The telephone network will support much of, a carrier's network is converged. So he'll take traffic from one side, move it to another, or interconnect to another carrier. As far as the carrier is concerned, it's the same thing. And so you do need to unify the regulation of the two because, again, you get sort of strange things happening like, the ITU saying just because I regulate the telephone network, I should regulate the Internet. And, oh, by the way, how exactly do you tell the difference between the two?
You have the similar thing in the consumer looking at video on their television set. They have over-the-air television, they have cable, they have over-the-top, over the internet. And, they do come in through three different means. There's a lot of places in the communication system where there's disparate treatment. That's not to say that it's right that they should be disparate. Maybe it should, the old should maybe dissipate or something new. Yeah.
Works better. It goes back to even what was called Computer 1, Computer 2 at the FCC. It's a question which has no easy issues, but take your question and even broaden it. What about wireless? The ITU-T has nothing to do with wireless, and a lot of the information travels along there. What you've got to do, there are some things which are legitimate concerns of the ITU. And one of the things that I understand that was done well in the last major time the telecom regs were looked at was there was a lot of flexibility built into it. There was an ability to negotiate peering or private arrangements. That may well be some legitimate concern, to have that flexibility on that basic level. But the bootstrap into regulating the Internet from there is the danger. Okay, it may not be so easy to draw the
right.
line.
And so it actually goes the other way too, right? So the other way is the question is the future of the telephone network multi-stakeholder regulation. So Reed will confirm I'm not in favor of moving the telecom regulations over to the Internet. But the question is, can multi-stakeholder self-governance take over as well in the telephone network? And if that were the case, then the ITU has less to hold on to because the whole thing unifies and we all move over to this multi-stakeholder.
I think to some extent that's
approach.
maybe a good way to look at it, as instead of creeping regulation of the telecom network to things like privacy and security and cybersecurity, which makes no sense at all, would be to sanction and to carry forward this idea of competition in networks and not to have detailed regulation there. And again, this is just a personal view.
So, Dan, let me just say, I think you're asking an incredibly important question, and one that has to be debated as you go into Wicket 12 in new terms. I think I would parse the question this way. This is just my view. First, is there any doubt that the FCC in the United States can regulate in accordance with the open internet rules, formerly called net neutrality rules? Eddie, right 2 chairs over to you, was the chief of staff working on these rules. My view would be there's no doubt that the Congress repeatedly, on average every other year for the last 80 years, has asked the FCC to carry out certain regulatory functions involving the communications between eyes and ears, regardless of the technological method. So in that respect, the question over the jurisdiction to regulate, I think that the fiction that data and voice, that IP and circuit switched somehow marks a difference that disempowers the FCC, that's a fiction that needs to be called out and rejected. Obviously, there's another side to it that you can read in the briefs that take the opposite position, and that'll be litigated. It is being argued in the Court of Appeals later this year. Now, having said that, what this report is about, and what I think the topic is about, is not whether nation states can, in fact, under international law, exercise sovereign power over the physical facilities that constitute the means by which the Internet is delivered, but whether they should do so. That's really what this is about, whether they could say, look, as nation states, we've decided we're not doing this. And when you look at the areas of human activity, business and social, there are many where nation states say, we don't choose to be involved. And that is certainly something that is at the very core of the notion of positive and negative liberties that our republic is based on. But not just our republic. That virtually every republic in the world is based on the notion that there are things that government will not do, and that's what they say in their constitutions. And you don't have to just look at our constitution to see that. So that's the way I would parse the question. The fiction is a fiction, the one you call out. The distinction between circuit switched and IP marks the place where governments die and where free-flowing anarchy begins. That's a fiction. But the other question, whether governments should carry the old regime on into the new regime and pour the old wine into the new bottles, that's the question being debated. That's at least my view.
Any other? Dan Brenner? We have a mic. Good.
Thanks. Dan Brenner with Hogan Lovells. First, I want to say how optimistic I am, having heard that it took 2 years. If it took 2 years to get this far, imagine how little will get done in 10 days of a wicket. So we do have a model. More seriously, and this is a great contribution, but what I think, there are many different themes, and Reed's point about having a multi-stakeholder group in China that kind of goes exactly is the opposite in some ways of what people generally associate with the multi-stakeholder process is a very good reminder that the process is more dynamic than I think sometimes advocates of that say. But I see, that some countries have the goals of China and Iran and other countries that want to use and suppress the internet for political reasons. And then I see a different group of countries that say in 1989 when Melbourne came up with these rather general, as Gary pointed out, the rules, if you read the ITU regulations, they're very general and they're actually easy to read. They don't have too many specifics, but one underlying assumption in 1989 was that there was a settlements process of telecommunications that enriched the countries that were able to prosper by that. And when you move to the internet environment, that process kind of wanders away. At the same time, there are other internet players who have enormous impact in countries, Google, Facebook, almost 1 billion Facebook members now. And those countries where Facebook is not present, present as a job creator or a wealth creator, may say, whatever we were getting out of the 1989 deal, we're not getting today, and that has to be addressed in the wicket. So I see a kind of the area of suppression as being one element that could lead to trouble, and the economic complaints of people who aren't really interested in undoing internet values, but say we're not, the numbers don't add up for us. I'd like your reaction to that.
You're right. I mean, we engaged in an exercise starting in 1994 on taking apart the settlements regime, taking apart the old telephone network and the structure under the ITU, and we were successful. And so what we did was we really hit a very sensitive sector of many developing countries, and that was the dominant telecom provider, many times owned by the government or linked to the ruling family, and we depleted their resources. And that was almost 20 years ago that we started this process, and now we're seeing the impact. What we tried to do in the report, the report is not about Wicked. It's not about the ITU. The conversation we're having now is related to something we see coming 8 months from now. The report started with an exercise that Cowie and Aronson did. I think that's the book there, no? Yeah. An advertisement for it, which basically said, are we at such a point in the technology of the internet that everything changes and gives us an opportunity to change as well? The structure of regulation by governments, the participation by the private sector, NGOs. And we tried to explore that, seeing an opportunity. That opportunity is, the door is closing. We now have some period of time to get our act together with regard to the ITU conference. That's why we're talking about it. But what's called for is some kind of concerted action on the part of the folks who have, that's all of us, to help the folks who don't. Help them understand the advantage here. Help them understand that just because they lost these particular payments doesn't mean they lost. We've not been very good at explaining the value of what has happened to the folks who are in power in these countries. Now, there are obviously lots of other groups in countries that we have mentioned and others we haven't, who are on our side, quote unquote, who see the value in technology and innovation and job growth and all of those good things. But they're the underclass in many of these countries, and the folks whose income we have affected over 20 years are pissed. And they have a place to go, and that is the ITU. That's where governments meet to talk about the regime that was established 100 years ago. And that's what this is their last-ditch effort. The report tried to come up with an alternative. I urge you to look at page 34. I think it's 34. No, it's not. Maybe it's 39. Yeah, it's page 39. It's called a thought experiment. That's where we came out. We came out with an idea of how we could do something different that was based on multi-stakeholder, that involved governments, that didn't ignore the legitimate role that governments have, just as Reed has expressed it. And Danny, the governments have a legitimate role in ensuring that they govern. They're looking for a way to do that in this environment. And if we don't give them a solution, as suggested perhaps on page 39, a staff thought exercise, if we don't give them a solution, they will go back to that which they know. And they know the ITU. They know the ITURs, the ITRs. And that's why they're redrafting them in the most archaic way you can imagine to try to apply document that was drafted 24 years ago based upon technology that was existing 30 years ago is going to apply to this technology of the next century. Completely bizarre, but not unheard of in the international environment. We have a very large task before us. We have to explain ourselves.
So the beginning of the report does state, it starts off with the value of the Internet to the world's people. And I think the presumption, the assumption of the report, which maybe didn't go into it in enough detail, is that all countries would benefit by having an open and free in the sense of not cost-free, but available, affordable Internet that its public is connected to.
Could I just underscore one point that Don made, because I think it ought not to be lost. This is I think, an insight about the political economy of this debate, which is that it's a mistake to look at this as, in the traditional ITU sense, it's a mistake to look at this as one country, one vote, because we understand where those votes come from in many, many of the countries that we're talking about. They come from one sector of that economy, of those governments, as you know. I can say that we've worked very hard in this administration to make sure that we take a broad view on Internet, on the values of the Internet and the values of the telecommunications sector. And for us, that means making sure that we include considerations about defense preparedness and intellectual property protection and human rights and health information and you name it. I think that the point that Don is making that is so important, that I think connects to the imperative of multi-stakeholder governance, is that we recognize the Internet as a radically horizontal institution, radically horizontal in its effect. It's not a sector. We have these nice studies from McKinsey and other places that show what the value of the Internet would be if it were a sector, and we learn it's somewhere between agriculture and transportation or something, I forgot. But it isn't. What it is, as we know, is infrastructure contribution to a whole range of activities in society, and that trying to wrap all that under this treaty structure, which really is only targeted at one sector of each economy, at one sector of each society, is just not a viable way forward. And I would say, my one bold prediction is that it wouldn't work. It just would fail. I'm not even sure who would pay attention. I'm not sure what it would even mean to pay attention. I think that Don is absolutely right, and Reed is right, that we need to make sure that governments understand and have mechanisms to connect to all the different decisions, all the different policy levers that are relevant, so that our interests as governments can be reflected. I think we actually have many of those mechanisms in place, and our task is to strengthen them.
Over here. Yeah, thank you.
And Nigel Cameron, Centre for Policy on Emerging Technologies. I suppose my question is about what the trending is. Now, obviously, various have been observing this process in the last few years and seeing the pushback or the catch-up and however you want to frame it. And, of course, with the so-called Arab Spring, I mean, a lot of chilling here, certainly how it was perceived in a lot of countries as they saw what could happen when you had these self-organizing networks being let loose. I mean, all sorts of things happening, you know, in the broader scheme of things over the last 3 or 4 years. What is the trending when it comes down to votes at ITU, and the capacity of the West essentially to frame this question as one which really is in the interests of developing countries on economic and similar grounds?
Full disclosure, Reed interrupted the last half of your last sentence. Say it again. I didn't want to miss it.
Danny, thank you. Yes, I was well. Reed, thank you, and I will take that as a compliment. I was asking really how we perceive the trending. Now, plainly, I mean, things like the Arab Spring, quote unquote, have scared a lot of governments, apart from anything else, whatever was really happening, using these media and so on. Various things are going on out there in the wider world as this 2-year process took place, as this ITU meeting comes up, as IGF moves, and so on. What is the trending, and to what extent is it really going to be possible to convince, especially developing economies, who of course are so many of the votes, led obviously by the BRICS, that there really is a fundamental economic argument for pulling back and taking a very serious risk in allowing a basic, if you like, in allowing for the first time, in a sense, in the whole intergovernmental setup, a multi-stakeholder process to be given, sort of formally to be given pride of place. This thing arose informally. This really is the question of whether it actually is past the conch and is able to take things forward.
It's a great question, Nigel. I don't think that any of us should expect that this issue is going to be resolved in one kind of quick set of votes in Dubai in December. So that makes Dan's theory a little bit less valuable. Unfortunately, it's not like we just have to get through those 12 days or however many days it is. But I think that's where, Nigel, your question about trends is important. If we took a snapshot in December 2012, would we get consensus from whoever thinks they are entitled to show up and express views? Would we get consensus? I doubt it. Are we trending in the right way? I think absolutely. You only have to listen to Chairman Genachowski's statistics about the growth of smartphones, internet-connected devices by definition, to realize where the trends on the ground are. I think that what we see really across a large number of intergovernmental engagements is whether it's on cybersecurity or intellectual property protection or some of the basic underlying internet infrastructure issues, ICANN, the IGF, that there's a growing interest in these internet institutions and in this multi-stakeholder style of governing. Are we going to sell it all in this year? Absolutely not. But I think the trend is in the right direction.
And it clearly, to the extent that we can lead with ideas and inclusive conversation with our colleagues around the world, we will be more successful. We're very successful, have been in this sector, this foundational sector, in the last 2 decades. When we have a vision of what we're after and we explain it, we're completely ineffective when we get a bit too big for our britches and expect everyone else to understand what it is we're about without actually sitting down and talking about it. So we have to show leadership, and that means we have to bring forward our ideas collectively. We're lucky because I think we have a pretty good consensus now in the United States of what we're after from both companies, government, and NGOs. And we have to go out there and talk about it. And not just with rhetoric, not just with all these highfalutin concepts, but real information that companies, countries, individuals can grasp.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions, and then so I'm going to have you both ask the questions. And then if anybody else wants to speak, because we were going to try to end sooner than we'd said 2 o'clock, but I'm thinking we're going to end at 1:30. So Jane, and over here, and Stefan, maybe we can get you to say a few words at the end. Go ahead and identify yourself.
Sure. Joan Michelson, thank you so much. Speaking of what Dan just said, Don, I'm sorry. How is this really going to work, and how are you going to reach the people who are not currently on the Internet, who are actually also a stakeholder but don't know it yet? Who defines who the stakeholders are? What's the mechanism? I mean, I applaud the principles and setting this out and starting someplace. I think it's fabulous. But speaking of leadership, I mean, what's the practical application for this and getting countries who have completely different cultural mores to agree and getting voices to the people who are currently voiceless and don't even know that this is an option? That's where the real economic growth is going to come from, and that's where a lot of the real business opportunities are going to be too, and we want to give them a stake in those opportunities as well.
So we'll ask your question, but before we do, let me just mention Ann Mei Chang over there, who's starting an alliance for Internet access. Is that Internet affordability? Access for Internet affordability to try to get people from that world, those who don't have access, better opportunity for access to the Internet. So people who are interested in that, Ann Mei Chang over there in the yes, next, sir, your question.
Thank you so much. George Mihails from Phoenix Partnerships. It's further to the question raised just before. Early this year, WIPO, World Intellectual Property Rights Organization, published the first report on intellectual property rights for creative industries. In August this year, China will organize the first World Congress on culture and creative IT industries, or subtitle, Cultural Creativity for a Sustainable Future. It would be in Dalian, and I'm invited as a speaker and to organize part of the sessions. My question is, and it probably important is also Qatar's started a project this year to finance for Arabian Peninsula to digitize Arabic culture content in the framework of the World Digital Library Project. So how will, your advice, your thinking about the impact on the issues you raised, which are critical and I support them, the impact on the development of creative industries or cultural industries. China being a country today determined to take a leadership, and they seem to be open for intellectual property rights to consider in the framework of economic development, where the creative industries are very important. And if I may repeat, the first time we have a report by WIPO, IP in creative industries, publicized in January this year. What impact will this current trend, which is, I think, a major trend, and the Chinese are taking it very seriously, India, even Russia. But China today wants to become an engine in this field. Thank you.
Okay, so two different questions. One is, what's the process that's going to get the world's population to participate and even learn about this, particularly the billions who aren't even connected yet? And second, how are we going to that there seems to be a revolution in thinking about intellectual property in the sense that more countries are signing on in one form or another, though it may be a little, as I get it, a little bit different from what some parties may exactly want. How do we think about those? Anybody want to answer, want to respond?
I'll just make one comment on the first question of how is it going to work. I think that I'd point to two examples of how it already works that are not all that well known. I think that the question of participation obviously comes in concentric circles. Everyone who uses the internet is not going to participate in the design of its core technology. But I think what we see is the opportunities for more and more communities that come online, that join the internet, have, I think, very effective mechanisms for making sure that the unique needs that they have are actually met. I have two examples. First one is the development of the internationalized domain names. So this is the ability to have internet domain names in character sets other than Western Roman characters. It's critical for the expansion of the internet, critical to make the internet and the web actually useful to the huge communities all around the world that don't happen to speak a Romance language or don't happen to write, from left to right across the page, and that happened. Both the domain name system has been successfully expanded just in less than 10 years, really, principally in about a 5-year period, through the really extraordinary participation of technical experts from countries that use other character sets than what we in the West are used to. So the Internet Engineering Task Force, a group called the Unicode Consortium, and ICANN all got together to figure out how to do this to make sure that the technical components were in place to actually make this work. And I think this is an example of the way in which just the technical and administrative side of multi-stakeholder internet governance is far more effective than you could imagine an intergovernmental process ever would have been for evolving technologies. And I think it was a huge success. It's affected literally hundreds of millions of people already. Everyone wasn't involved. All the readers and users of those languages weren't involved. But people who you wouldn't ordinarily think of as being involved in developing kind of state-of-the-art internet technology did have a way to participate. I think that's a huge step. And that kind of thing will continue. The Internet Engineering Task Force just recently had one of their major annual meetings in Beijing. There was huge participation. This kind of thing will continue. So it's going to work bit by bit, piece by piece, and it's not going to be all visible, in my opinion, from one single place. But the different needs of different communities are going to find ways to have their needs met.
Can I just ask a follow-up? Is the goal to get countries to agree to who is supposed to agree to these principles? I guess is the fundamental question.
Well, I don't mean to be glib about this, but everyone. Meaning, I do think that it is in the nature of the vision of the internet community that we're talking about that literally everyone who is part of this common medium would have some core documents, some core expression of belief about the way it should work. And the reason I mentioned the philosopher Parfit is that what's behind that is this notion that it is not merely a medium for the subjective expression of what you think is best for yourself, and number two, it is absolutely not a medium in which the primary goal is to take from the other and get for yourself. Rather, it is an area for collective activity. And that is what he's talking about from a philosophical approach. You could also talk about it and put your economics hat and say that it's about externalities and network effects. You can approach it from many different perspectives, and they all eventually will get you to the same place. If I could pivot very quickly and very briefly to pick up on the question that you asked and just a fraction of the question about innovation in China. 2 points. First of all, one of our co-authors, Peter Cowie, is on his way to China to be part of an American-Chinese panel on innovation in China. There are many, many things to be said about innovation in China, but and I don't pretend to be the expert, but I would like to make two observations based on 20 years of visiting there and having various government and business activities in China. Observation one, it doesn't do either the U.S. or China any good to avoid talking about what in the behavior of the other we dislike. That doesn't do any good at all. Let me give you a case in point. In the beginning of 2009, my interpretation of the view of the incoming Obama administration about China was that it was going to be very important to recognize that the Chinese purchases of our sovereign debt were in our best interest. But also this, very important to find a way to communicate to the government in China that their undervaluation of their currency was contrary to the best interest of the whole world and also their long-run best interest. What's happened? What's happened over now nearly 3 years is that, in fact, they have changed the valuation of their currency quite significantly, and just last week made another move in that direction. Did they do it because somebody in the U.S. told them to? No. But it wasn't irrelevant either. It was absolutely critical that the dialogue be rich and continuous, respectful but serious and purposeful. And furthermore, the other thing that's happened is that the ownership of American sovereign debt is much more widely dispersed across countries all around the world now. In other words, in both critical areas, much progress has been made, not because we decided to avert the gaze, but because we actually committed to serious fact-based discussion, and that's what we're saying here about the Internet. The other thing I want to say about it is, if you're an individual company, in the outside of China, enormous pressure can be brought to bear on you to behave in accordance with Chinese standards as to the Internet, as those standards exist at that moment. But everybody that's ever done business there knows you have many other potential partners in China who actually would prefer to do business with you along a different regime where intellectual property is clearly respected and is enforced. And so if you raise those questions, and if you're a company, you have to get somebody else to help you raise them. But if you raise those questions, and if they're constantly debated, you're going to get a lot closer, a lot faster to a universal rule that's going to benefit everyone. That's what we're talking about here when Danny talks about the intellectual property regime. We're talking about finding ways to engage on that topic. So we need to make sure that we all recognize an isolated individual agent can't make any real difference and is going to end up having deviancy defined downwards, in Senator Moynihan's famous phrase. But when we act collectively, we're much, much more likely to have the universal benefit, because of principles of collective action, actually be realized, and then have that be the principle on which we act.
Let me just, I'll call on Stefan in a second, but mention that a lot of the discussion, particularly in the formation of the IDEA project, was where is it important that there be collective action? What are the instances? Or conversely, what happens when a company or an individual is left out there by themselves through one form or another of deviant behavior, or behavior that is deviant might not be the right word, but behavior that is inimical to the free flow of goods, services, and ideas globally over the Internet. Sure.
This was unstated throughout all of our discussions, but I want to state it before we close, and that is the wonderful power of the Aspen Institute and Charlie's program in particular to bring people together here to have this serious discourse. I think without that, we wouldn't have made the progress we've been able to make.
Stefan Verhulst, who really took a leadership position among the foundations and was largely responsible, I think, for having this project move forward.
So I just want to follow up with what Carrie said and congratulate the Aspen Institute and especially also the authors of the report and the process with what has been achieved, which is tremendous from my point of view. And I also congratulate taking the extra mile and actually having a document coming out of it, which quite often is seen as just a report, but at least it's a stated document of where we ended and how we move forward. And I like the the positioning of the report as being the first report, which clearly indicates that, of course, in this arena, a job is never done. And I think that was also made clear throughout this discussion. But from my point of view, and again, it's a personal point of view, I think everyone is here speaking on personal conditions. From my own personal point of view, I think this project and moving forward as well, this project really has three components. And I think reflecting on what Nigel asked with regard to trending, we can also see trends in those three components, and one is more achieved than the other one. The first component is clearly the principles, and I think we've achieved a lot here, and OECD has moved that forward as well. And I think last year was the year of the principles, and I think we have now a solid understanding of what the principles should be governing. The second component is clearly the governance component, i.e. the multi-stakeholder model, which is now becoming the common set, despite the ITU and despite other attempts, but at least the common understanding of how to move forward. There is a lot of operational questions, and I totally agree with Gary that there is a lot of thinking that needs to go into actually fleshing this further out. But the third component, and that's where I'm getting more and more worried about, is actually the value proposition. And meaning being a foundation with a broad mission on IT, have the opportunity to sit in many occasions and many meetings, and it seems to me that there is a battle going on, a battle over the narratives between, on the one hand, the destruction of the Internet, meaning destruction as a result of the Internet, destruction of jobs, destruction of power as a result of, look at Arab Spring, for instance, destruction of security and so on. And on the other hand, of course, you have the liberal utopian point of view, which is about the creation as a result of the Internet. And I'm getting worried that it's much easier to document the destruction these days than actually the creation. And I think that's the third component that needs to be developed more, which is what is the value proposition? If you want to have people adopt the principles, if you want to have them adopt the multi-stakeholder, for what purpose? What's the value that they're going to get out of that? And that's the third component, which is meaning fleshed out at the beginning to a certain extent, but it's very hard to get evidence actually that documents jobs created as a result of the Internet. Innovation, of course, is the mantra, but how does it contribute to economic growth? And I think that's part of the second report, I guess, that you're planning to write. But it seems to me those three elements are critical in this arena moving forward.
Okay, great concluding comment, and one that, maybe that third point we took too much for granted, I think, in just sort of moving through it very quickly in the front. So once again, I want to thank the staff, Gary, who directed it, Sarah Eppenheimer, who managed it, the many players from Peter Cowie and Jonathan Aronson and Don Abelson and Shanti Kalathal and Melanie Hart and Kate Ashton, who's not back there anymore, but had a hand in writing the report, and Skadden Arps, who gave pro bono assistance, and most of all to our chairman, Reed Hunt, and the foundations, the Markle Foundation, MacArthur, Knight, and Ford Foundations, who made it possible, but most particularly the many companies, government officials, and civil organizations, civil society organizations who participated with us, were willing to be part of this process, give their time, their ideas, their insights to make this possible to this point. We will be distributing this report mostly online for free download. We do have some printed copies that are available, but we're hoping that people will engage in a dialogue on the internet at www.aspeninstitute.org/idea or on the Twitter hashtag #IdeaReport. We will try to make it available in various other forums over the coming year or so, and see what develops. Obviously, there's a big event at the end of the year in the WCIT, the WCIT conference in Dubai, that's been mentioned, and there's some other forums that we hope this will be a part of. So thank you for being a part of this, and let us hear from you.